welcome to Global Perspectives on Culturally Responsive Teaching Practices in Orientation and Mobility, presented by Molly Pasley and panelists Jeremy Hill, Oseas De Leon, Angel Black, Autumn Booths, Mackenzie S., and hopefully Steve Widders will show up with us. I'm Leandra Otmo, and I'll be your moderator today. Q&A will be held at the end of the session, so please hold your questions for the presenters until the Q&A time. At that time, I will read them out loud to our presenters in the order that they come in.
Thank you so much for having me. So let's jump on in. So first I'm going to start by sharing my screen so I can show the presentation. Here we are. Okay. All right, so as Leandra said, it's not just me. I know that's what it says on the thing is Molly Pasley and panelists. Well, really the focus is not on me, it's on our panelists. I'm going to provide a little bit of background to start about culturally responsive teaching, and then we're really going to get to hear from the people who are out in the field, specifically our clients who are from various parts of all over the world. Okay, so today we will be talking about, you're going to learn about the main principles of culturally responsive teaching practices in orientation and mobility, the experiences of O&M clients, and which culturally responsive teaching practices their O&M used that resonated with them the most, and some teaching strategies that were used by these very specific O&Ms that are when working with learners from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds all around the world. So something very important that I want to note at the start of this presentation is that you're not going to walk away from this as being a culturally responsive teacher. That's lifelong work. It's an ongoing process. This panel presentation is just a quick overview of some of the main components of culturally responsive teaching practices, which is a mouthful, so you might hear me call it CRTP over the course of this presentation, and how they are included in O&M instruction by a few O&M specialists and the experiences of a few clients in different parts of the world. So the way I think of culturally responsive teaching is that being a culturally responsive teacher is called elephant work, or it's elephant work, in that it takes you a while to take one bite out of the elephant at a time. Okay, so we have on the screen here a map of the world. We've got different locator dots. One is in southeastern Alaska in Juneau. Two of our panelists are from Juneau. One is in Anchorage, Alaska. Peoria, Illinois, right in the heart of the US. That's where I'm from. We've got one in Guatemala, which is Guatemala, and then also one in Miami, Florida, because our panelist was originally from Guatemala, is now living in Miami, Florida. And then you'll see on the far right side, we have two participants or panelists from Australia. The first one is from Brisbane in Queensland, and Armadale from New South Wales in Australia. So just to kind of let you know how the flow of this is going to be, first we're gonna talk about culturally responsive teaching, what it is and why we care about it. We'll introduce our panelists. We'll have a very fruitful discussion with our panelists, and then at the end you'll have the opportunity to ask them some questions. Okay, so the very first thing I want to do is a chat waterfall. So look, we've got this beautiful image of a rumbling waterfall. I hope that you use the bathroom during that 30-minute break, or else this might trigger your bladder, so sorry about that. So we're going to do a very quick activity. In the chat, first we just want to get all of your ideas out in the chat. So go ahead and type in, what do you think of when you hear the words culturally responsive teaching? And Leandra, I know this is a little bit of a punt, but I'd like for you to read just kind of as they're coming in, if you could start reading maybe a handful of them.
Sure. Listening.
Okay.
Respect, awareness, accepting, understanding, respecting, empathy. Oh, they're going so fast.
I know, yeah, just whichever ones you can catch, that's totally fine.
Flexibility, sensitivity, language, being respectful, just knowing the student's background and culture, being open to learning, being aware of beliefs.
A lot of really great comments in there. Thank you so much for sharing those.
Welcome.
Okay, so some of these you'll notice that were included in the chat. So we're going to talk about some of the major components of culturally responsive teaching as presented by Geneva Gay. And just so you know, you don't have actual access to the slide deck, but you do have there's a downloadable resources sheet that has the content from the slides, and then a whole list of great resources for you. Some are journal articles, some are websites for your own reference as you continue on your journey with culturally responsive teaching. So something to keep in mind, or well, many of the things that you're going to learn about, they might actually be a review, and it sounds like for some of you it is. And they might be some new ideas. Just like with culturally responsive teaching, we want to meet learners where they are, which is also why I asked you all to share what are your thoughts about, or what do you think of when you think of culturally responsive teaching? So first, we're going to start by going through some of these main components, and which when you think about, they're just really good teaching. So for example, something to keep in mind is that culturally responsive teaching is an intentional teaching approach. It's not something that we come by mistake. They're also well developed, or it's also where the teacher has developed a cultural diversity knowledge base. It's something they've spent time with. If there's students from different cultures, they have taken the time to learn about those individual cultures. The use of culturally responsive teaching, it really focuses on the learner's assets instead of why they can't do something. In O&M, we need to be aware of learners' needs and areas for growth, but where CRT differs is that we're focusing on the assets that learners bring to the table to create more meaningful learning opportunities and to enhance their growth. And teachers who want to be culturally responsive take the time to develop their own knowledge about the cultural diversity of the people with whom they work. This includes getting to know clients, families, community members, and they also implement culturally relevant curricula. And that means that in addition to learning about the culture of their clients, they have open conversations with the people involved to come up with a plan for instruction. And you'll get to hear from some of our panelists when they talk about ways that they have developed culturally relevant curricula. This next one is probably going to sound like a no-brainer, because oftentimes we're the ones who have high expectations for our students or our clients with visual impairments, and the other people in their world may not. We want to display these high expectations for all of our students. So when we think about it in terms of a tide, the tide rises to meet the expectations. So if we keep them high and provide opportunities to build learner skills through instruction, they can meet those high expectations. So we don't want to lower them because then there really isn't anywhere for our students to go in terms of growth. The last two components of culturally responsive teaching practices are appreciating different communication styles and using multicultural examples in instruction. So in my own experience, learning about the student and their support network can really help with opening the doors to better communication and incorporating the student's culture into instruction. Okay, so what does that look like in orientation and mobility instruction? So before we can do any of the things that are listed on this slide, we want to make sure, or we need to first listen and learn. Again, you'll hear that with some of the videos that we've got. For those of our panelists that weren't able to join us live, we have, like our Alaskans, we have some videos that you'll get to see a little bit later. In orientation and mobility, we want to use community norms and values to determine relevant target skills for assessment and instruction. And this is noted in Mary Tellefson's new book that came out in 2023, Culturally Responsive Orientation and Mobility Standards. We also want to create a supportive learning environment and maintain those high expectations. So if we think about it, learners exist not just solely by themselves. They live and exist in a community, and we need to learn about that community and understand their community participation to make sure that what we're teaching is relevant to that learner. If it isn't relevant, then they're not going to use the skills, as many of us know. It's just kind of like, well, I mean, how many times have you asked, when am I ever going to use this? I don't need to know geometry. When am I ever going to need this in my future life? We need to make sure that we're connecting the dots for our learners. And a way that we can do that is by showing that we support and are learning about their community norms in order to make their instruction relevant. So we can do this by observing what people in the same or comparable environments are able to do. When we talk about values, these can differ from person to person. So recognizing that what I value as a white woman from Illinois could be very, and is likely different from maybe some of the clients that I work with. We also need to be mindful that we're not imposing our own values onto the learner, especially if they conflict with the learner's values. For example, and this is noted in Mary Tellefson's book, that independence is not a value that all people have. Instead, interdependence or codependence are more highly valued. And instead of striving for quote unquote independence, we may try to help the learner increase community involvement and participation instead of just focusing on independent travel skills. So again, you'll hear some of the panelists talk about what independent means to them within their specific context. So when we look at creating a supportive learning environment, this is building an authentic relationship with care and respect and a welcoming environment with materials that reflect the learner's diversity. And then with maintaining high expectations, some of the ways that you can do that is by just asking yourself, where can I raise the expectations for the learners? And this might, I know that we work with a wide variety, not just culturally diverse, linguistically diverse, but also they might have additional disabilities. And so how can we keep expectations high and in order to help those students learn and grow to reach their highest potential? So this could be, or an opportunity or a way to do that would be identifying the skills needed and providing support to help the learners reach those higher expectations. So we think about scaffolding or building up the supports to help get our student, to help again, raise that tide, raise them up to the level of our high expectations. We also want to promote a growth mindset and tell them, hey, it's okay to make mistakes. I mean, we don't really want to make mistakes as we're getting ready to cross the street, but let's make mistakes in more structured environments. And then for those of you who just this is a visual representation of culturally responsive sustaining education. It's just an infographic on the screen. There is on the resource document, there's a link to it. I'm just going to do a quick description of what's on the screen for those, just for everybody's benefit. One is that you're centering and valuing students' cultures and identities. I know some people mentioned that in the chat about students' cultures, using rigorous and relevant curriculum, building strong positive relationships between students, families, and school staff, and supporting students to develop the knowledge, skills, and vision to transform the world. I want to give another disclaimer. So in addition to, you're not going to necessarily be able to walk away from this presentation as I am a culturally responsive teacher. You're going to learn some things, but really that journey is for you to take, and you making that decision. We just kind of hope to whet your appetite and give you some unique perspectives about being a culturally responsive teacher, and then some examples of how that's in use. So the disclaimer I have on the screen here is that the experiences you're going to hear about today are only from the individual's point of view. They are not representative of the entire community. So we want you to keep in mind that when you walk away from this presentation that you've learned about, for example, if Uncle Steve is able to make it with us today, you've learned about Uncle Steve's experience as a vision impaired Indigenous Australian. Or in the instance of Oseas, you're learning about one person from Guatemala who has relocated to the United States. But not all vision impaired people who share those cultural identities. Okay, so now we are on to our introduction. So I'll start by introducing myself, give you a little bit of background on me. I know we're doing this a little bit later in the presentation than we usually do. I'm also going to introduce our people joining us via video, and then we'll give the opportunity for Jeremy, Oseas, and Steve to introduce themselves. So my name is Molly Pasley. I'm an assistant professor in the Visual Disabilities program at Northern Illinois University. And before starting at NIU, I worked as a teacher of students with visual impairments and a certified orientation and mobility specialist with children all over Illinois. I've also worked with adults in the Veterans Administration System here in the US, and I teach graduate and undergraduate courses in our visual disabilities program. We also have Angel Black joining us from the special education, I don't remember what CISA stands for, but CISA's Vision and O&M. She is their vision and O&M specialist since 2016. She's also working as a project coordinator for the Alaska Deafblind Project. She's originally from Norman, Oklahoma, and she moved to Alaska in 2016, sight unseen, and now she calls it home. She received her BS in cross-categorical special education from Missouri State, and she's a nationally certified orientation and mobility specialist from Portland State. We also have Autumn Booths, who is a certified teacher of students with visual impairments and a certified orientation and mobility specialist. And she is a graduate of Kutztown University with her bachelor's degrees in special ed and visual impairment, and also in elementary education. She graduated from the University of Pittsburgh in 2020 with her master's in education, and in 2021 with her O&M certificate. And she's actually been teaching in Alaska for 6 years, or I'm sorry, she's been teaching for 6 years and currently holds the position of TSVI and comms for the Juneau School District in Juneau, Alaska. She's taught in Western and South Central Pennsylvania as well, and she's presented at various conferences throughout her teaching career. And then you'll also see a little one. Her name is Mackenzie. She's 9 years old. She's a 3rd grade student in the Tlingit Culture, Language, and Literacy program in Juneau, Alaska. And she refers to herself as a clan leader of the Eagle Bear Clan. Okay, Jeremy, if you'd like to start introducing yourself.
Sure. Thank you very much, Molly. My name's Jeremy Hill. Like you said, I'm certainly not an expert at working with Indigenous people in Australia, but I've worked in orientation and mobility now for about 35 years and worked around different parts of Australia. And now I presently, last couple of years, I've worked in the very top of Australia in Darwin and had the fortune to actually meet with a couple of Indigenous people and the communities around them. So I've learned a little bit, but as you say, you can't generalize about them, but I think you just have to do your homework and you have to learn about people before you dive in there. So looking forward to this discussion today.
Oseas, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
From Guatemala. I currently live in Miami and I am totally blind. Very happy to be here.
Great, thank you. And Jeremy, did we hear from Uncle Steve?
Not yet. I'm hoping he'll be joining us soon. He's probably having perhaps a couple of technical hitches, but
okay.
As soon as he does, I'll put him on.
Okay, and it looks like Sarah Oliveira says, Oseas, so great to see you here. Okay, so let's...
What was the name of the person again?
Sarah Oliveira.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Great
Sure.
to hear from her.
Oops. Okay, so sorry, I now am having some technical difficulties here. Let me just... So the first question we're going to ask is, what is independence to you? There we go. What does independence mean to you? So Oseas, if you would like to start, if you would like to start with that.
Sure. To me, independence is the ability to navigate safely and confidently from point A to point B.
I think when you ask clients what is independence to them, a fascinating conversation I had with an Indigenous guy in Darwin, and he said independence can be a little bit lonely sometimes because he's used to getting around with his friends and his colleagues and his family. And so he's saying his favorite thing is interdependence. There's times when it's a hot day in Darwin and it's humid and you don't want to be hanging onto someone's arm. You actually want to follow them with some good cane skills and keep track of things and enjoy the fact of walking and that sort of thing. So it's having enough skills to be able to do the things you want to do. But then when you want to be independent, you have the skills and the confidence to do so. So I think it's a lot of different things for different people. And I know a lot of people would like to walk with other people, but to be independent when you need to be is terrific. So yeah, I learned a lot from that discussion.
So Cassie's gonna share her screen and you're gonna see a video of our 9-year-old Mackenzie from the Tlingit clan. And she's up in Juneau, Alaska.
Hi, Mackenzie. Our first question here is, what is independence to you? Alone, and you're doing things by yourself. And is being independent important to you?
Yes.
Why is that?
So I can practice doing it by myself sometimes. When I get older, I can know how to do it.
We noted at the start that independence looks differently to everybody. So in Jeremy's case, what he was describing was this, there's this preference toward interdependence. And then in the Tellefson book, it's not that we're necessarily striving for independence in the way that we might think of as orientation and mobility specialists as being independent. It might be that interdependence, or being able to walk around the community, or engage in collaborative activities with other people in your community. So our next question we have is, how have you adjusted your communication strategies to foster positive relationships with your O&M specialist? Okay, so why don't we start with, actually, let's start with Jeremy this time. What are some ways that you have adjusted your communication strategies to foster positive relationships? I know you are the O&M specialist, but with your clients.
Certainly, I think before you go into, and we need to know this for a lot of different families and communities, you need to do your homework before you go in. There's with the Indigenous people in Australia, as we probably are around the world, there's a very close network of people around that person, people who rely on assisting that person, given the fact they have a vision impairment. And so in Australia, you have a hierarchy of elders, and I'm hoping that Steve joins us soon, because he's Uncle Steve, and he's very high up in the community there, because he's somebody who everybody looks up to and everybody respects. And I think the fact that he has a vision impairment, he's been pivotal in assisting other people to come to terms with that, because he's been there and done a lot of the training. So making sure, because I go to a lot of remote places in Australia, making sure before you land there and go and see people, you do know who the key people are. Otherwise, they are important, because they're the ones who spread the word and support people. And when I'm gone, because a lot of these remote visits, you go in perhaps once every few months if you're lucky, you've got to have a support system there when you've gone. And that support system is important on the family and that sort of thing. Whereas I think you find in sort of in white Australia, you meet the client out the front door, and you take them out, and you give them their orientation mobility lesson, and they go back and they might tell mum and dad about it if they want to. But in societies I visit, everybody knows what's going on. You've got a lovely photograph there where Steve lives. It's a very green place, Armidale, and it's a very cold place. It's quite high up. And that's the driving into the university grounds, called the University of New England. It's a very American name, isn't it? So it's a very, that's Elm Street, actually. And it goes a beautiful orange color in the autumn time, and all the leaves fall on the ground. So there are some amazing places to teach O&M around Armidale. And I think where I work, in the more remote and the more areas of Queensland, I'm learning that because I don't live there, you ask the person themselves, where would you like to have your lesson? Where is a nice cool place under the trees? And so they are the experts of their own environment. So as I was saying, just knowing who's who, knowing who the agencies are too, because some terrific agencies that have set up around these people, and they're very good at helping to support my skills when I'm not around too. And then, as I say, knowing where to practice, where would they like to go that they feel at ease? A lot of people, you and I, teaching people, probably don't want to be seen walking up and down your main street, because that's where people know you. So we go and find a slightly quieter area, or somewhere where people don't know you or recognize you. And Indigenous people are very supportive for each other. So if you go somewhere that's too busy, they're all shouting, hey, you're doing a great job, and hey, what are you doing? And it's all very lovely and very interactive, but you don't get a lot done because an awful lot of conversations going on too. So I'm learning a lot about it, and I think the biggest thing I've learned is to stop and listen and pay attention to what's going on around them in their community.
Thanks for sharing that, Jeremy. Cassie, do you want to? Oh, never mind. That's okay. Hey, Oseas, go ahead, and you're up. How have you adjusted your communication strategies to foster positive relationships with your O&M specialist?
Well, I learned to be direct. When I talk to my orientation mobility instructor, I like to let my instructor know which ones are my strengths and which ones are my weaknesses. And for example, I don't feel like I'm good with maps. So sometimes maps, tactile maps, rather than helping me, they confuse me. So I prefer probably that we walk the route and we just focus on landmarks first. I would do sighted guide first a couple of times to walk through the route and focus on the 2 or 3 landmarks, and then I can try the route. If we were to use a tactile option, it has to be a bigger tactile, let's say, map, not those small ones. But also, since I read Braille, I mean Braille means a lot. Like if I'm going to a big campus, I tell the instructor this is what I want from the lesson. And please let's no focus on my cane skills because I've been using the cane since I was 6, so that's more than 30 years ago. So let's not focus on the basic. Let's focus on this, and this. So being straightforward has helped me strengthen my communication with my O&M instructor.
So I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, Oseas. You're in a unique situation that you have received orientation and mobility instruction in Guatemala and also in the United States. What changes, or how did you, if you did, have to adjust your communication with your O&M specialist? How did that differ when you were living in Guatemala versus when you were living in the US?
Yes, well, first of all, I had to learn the language here in the US. I only my primary training was in Spanish, so I had to learn to touch technique. For example, the type of tip that I use for my cane, the parts of the cane in English. So, for example, if I'm going to cross the street and they tell me flag, it took me a while to realize what flag meant before crossing the street. And then the terminology, even when I had already learned English, learning the terminology was key to start understanding my lessons better. Also, I learned that we were incorporating technology into my lessons, and that was something that I wasn't used to. So I was paying attention to some other things that I had not paid attention before. And also, if I were to request for help, that and even that is in Spanish, and in the community that lives here in Miami, if I'm going to cross the street, they would say in a different way that we say it in Guatemala. So definitely learning the language, not just English, but also the way they speak Spanish in Miami was very helpful to make my O&M lessons more meaningful to my day-to-day skills or routine.
Thank you so much for sharing. Cassie, if you want to put that image back up, I can describe it. So there was an image on the screen of what looked like an area in Miami. I believe there's some sidewalks. It looks like a pretty busy area. It's well, fairly busy area. It's the back of a building, Arahi's Bakery. There's posts. It looks like a business area. There's streets parked on the side of the street. Yeah. Okay. If you'd like to, or if you could play there, Cassie, if you could play Angel's video starting at 3:20.
With their families. You have to build trust. I am a white woman coming into a native village, and I have to build trust with these families and with students and school administrators and tribal leaders and the elders of the village. And it takes a long time. It takes a long time. Alaska is noted for teachers coming and going quickly. It's a harsh environment and difficult. And so you may have a teacher for a year and then they leave and go back down to the lower 48 and then they have a new teacher. So I have a student who I met with his parents, and their first question for me was, how do we know you're going to stay? Why should we trust you with our son? And what makes you any different? So there was already a wall built up that I had to slowly, brick by brick, tear down. And now I have a great relationship with his family, but it has taken years of building that relationship with them and building that trust. So that's probably the first and foremost thing that I always work on with my students and their families. The last question that I was asked.
So our next, actually, sorry, I was moving ahead. Didn't mean to. Cassie, go ahead and share, or go ahead and play. So next we have Mackenzie, our 9-year-old. She had because that's kind of an adult question to ask a 9-year-old about how her communication has changed or how she's adjusted that, and even though it might be a little bit heavy for her. So instead, what her O&M specialist asked was, how have you let your O&M specialist know what you need? So we're going to hear from Mackenzie. So go ahead and play M2, please.
This question, Mackenzie, is how have you let your O&M specialist, me, know what you need?
Telling them what I need, like a new tool that helps me.
And when we're doing mobility training, what will you ask me to do? If we're crossing streets, you'll
Ask if I can hold your arm.
Yep. And you'll ask me if there's other cars around and if it's safe to cross.
So go ahead and put in the chat, what are some of the connections you're already hearing about? So when we think about those main components of culturally responsive teaching, intentional teaching approach, well-developed cultural diversity knowledge base, implementing culturally relevant curricula, displaying high expectations, different communication styles, and multicultural examples. Go ahead and put one example that you have heard our panelists talk about so far of how they're including culturally responsive teaching practices when they're working with their clients, or the clients, the things that they're having to do with their O&M specialists, or how they're adapting, living or working with someone from a different culture. Doing your homework, communicating is important, asking the client what they feel, building rapport, absolutely, absolutely. Relationships and connecting with family. Great, these are all really great. Okay, we also had some nice comments in the chat that Becky talks to them about their favorite food from their culture, and then you go try that food and then report back. So that's a fun way to engage in learning more about a person's culture. Okay, so next we are going to look at, we want to know, how do you include your family or support networks in your O&M training? So Jeremy, if you'd like to talk through that first.
I'm just getting Steve on, if that's okay. Can I jump? So I think we might have some good news soon. So I'm just getting off the air for 2 seconds. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oseas. Yeah, no worries. Oseas, we're going to have you start then. So I'll ask that question again. How have you involved your family or your support networks in your orientation and mobility training?
Well, I since my siblings grew up with me being blind, think my mom played a major role. She learned from my instructors, O&M instructors, when I was a child, to let my siblings know how important it was for me to learn about my environment. So when we were younger, I used to ask them for a description of surroundings, as if we were playing soccer in the soccer field, or if I was riding the bike, and then later on crossing the street, they would tell me, okay, so we are in a corner of the street, or the school where you are, because some of them went to school with me, different grades. They would describe things. So it's been always an open communication with them about my orientation. And whenever I need something, I ask them for the description of my environment. So yeah, to answer your question in a few words, having an open communication with them about orientation and mobility has helped me get involved in my mobility, my orientation.
Excellent. Cassie, whilst Jeremy is linking up with Steve, do you want to play M3?
I can, and Steve is in the room. Look at him! So I'll play M3 and then we'll grab Steve.
Perfect.
All right, Mackenzie. Our next question is, How do you include your family or support network in your O&M training?
They help me know if there's something big, tiny, or medium up front of me. If I don't use my cane, I can probably hurt myself, trip, fall, or hurt my head.
You're right. And is your family supportive of you using your cane?
Yes.
They like you using it?
Yes.
Do you use it when you get on the bus with mom too?
Yes.
Okay.
I take it anywhere I need to go, like go to the store, go on the bus, go to my dentist, or go to my doctor's. I take it anywhere I need to.
So just to provide a little bit of context there, Mackenzie takes the bus with her family. So the city bus or fixed route bus, public transportation to go to all of those different places she listed. So the dentist, doctor's appointments, to I think to school, she takes public transportation. And so she has that family support where they remind her to use her cane, or they're supportive of her using the cane when they're out and about in the community. Okay, so Jeremy, how about you? How do you include family supports and networks in your O&M training or when you're working with your clients?
I think, as I say, it's so important because unlike when I'm working in the city in Brisbane where I live or where I've worked in the cities before, you can enjoy an opportunity to see people every fortnight or so. Or whereas in these communities, you need somebody who's consistently with that person to say, hey, can you come along with us on the lesson? And very often that person's the driver as well, or the carer or the support worker. And they can come out. And the beautiful thing about that is they're learning about the skills as well. And if they're learning the skills, there's a little bit of poetic license where you might come back and they've picked up a few habits, but usually they've learned some pretty good cane skills and they've learned the terrain. And I'm usually working in places where I know very little about the actual area and they know everything. So I'm always on the back foot on that, which is great. But it's good. And I think a very important thing that when we get Steve on too is something I say to people is what would you like? And there was one of the first things Indigenous people says, we don't want a white cane. We want a cane with Indigenous colours on it. So it's glorious colours, the black, yellow, and the different colours up the length of the cane, and that gives them their pride. And so we've found an Australian company that's very happy to put those colours onto the long cane. And that's something now I carry in my kit bag to say, hey, what do you think about this? And that's great, yeah.
When they use those colors, do they use reflective tape for those colors? Or is it?
Yeah, still reflective. It's probably an Australian thing. Some people put their football colours on them too. I think it's tricky if you put a very dark colour on, like purple or black, because sighted people come out of shops and don't really see the cane and that sort of thing. But I think, and the same thing too with long canes is sometimes adapting the tips as well, because we walk in some pretty rough terrain. So things like the Dakota tips being quite good. Bundu Bash has been a very popular tip, very good for winding your way through the goat tracks or the dirt tracks and that sort of thing. And yeah, I was teaching a guy not long ago in Darwin who had a habit of pointing at things and pointing to people. So he had to sort of step back when he was pointing with his cane. But yeah, it's a fascinating world, but I've learned a lot since I've just learned to listen and ask them actually what they want. And that's very different.
It's sounding like, and I know it's hard to do that on the fly like this, but there are some folks who are interested in seeing pictures of those. So maybe as a follow-up, we can post pictures or something to the Facebook chat or the Facebook group, or maybe while we're asking.
I think Cassie's got a couple of pictures there of a light plane coming into one of the islands that I go to sometimes too. But
great, do you mind sharing that, Cassie?
Oh, perfect.
Can you describe that?
We're flying into Palm Island. For those of you who've been to Australia, it's off the coast from Townsville. Townsville at present is actually having a direct connection with a cyclone as we speak. So everybody's battling down in Townsville. Palm Island is about 20 minutes flight. You can't carry a lot of equipment. You can probably get away with one cane or a couple of canes and things like that, because you can't carry much on these little planes. And the reason I even go to Palm Island was I made a connection with the local optometrist who also flies in, flies out to that particular island. And he works with the Indigenous Health. There's an Indigenous Health clinic there, which have a really supportive, they have a group of GPs, they have a optometrist, so to say, they have nursing staff, they have people who, midwives and that sort of thing. And they come in from this clinic. The clinic is all decked out as an Indigenous clinic. It's got all the colors. People on the front desk who are Indigenous, so you feel like you're a guest when you arrive there. And it's so nice to have that set up, because it's a nice connection with the local people. And you're coming into their island, and they know, only they know the way around the island. And so, yeah, it's very special. And I think with these projects, you start off little, you find one person you can train, and then you say to them, if they're impressed with the service, they will make sure they tell others about it. So if the word doesn't get around, you know you've not done a very good job.
Yeah, a lot of times we're our biggest PR people.
Yes, yeah. And they use language like, talk to this guy, he'll give you a stick. And go, that's great, thanks very much. Thanks very much.
Okay, so looking at we're gonna go to the next question, and then we'll ask Steve to join us, and we'll probably go back through, have him introduce and go through some of these other questions, revisit them when he has the opportunity to get logged in. How do you include, or no, that did that one already, sorry folks. The next, this is a two-pronged question. What were the barriers to accessing O&M services in your community, and how would you improve O&M services to people within your culture? So Oseas, I'd like to start with you. I'll read that again. What were the barriers to accessing O&M services in your community? We can start with that.
Well, in Guatemala, there's not too many certified O&M instructors. Very few. I will be embarrassed, but I believe when I was a child, maybe there were 3 or 4 for the entire country. We're talking back then 11 million people, so now it's 18 million people. It's a lot of people. There's definitely a lot of people who are visually impaired that do not receive the services. Yes, I think that's the biggest barrier.
And then the second part of that question is, how would you improve O&M services to people within your culture?
Well, starting more, certifying more instructors, making workshops like this ones to raise awareness of the need of this orientation and mobility, how important it is for people who are blind and visually impaired.
Thank you so much for sharing. Jeremy, would you like to share about some of the barriers that were to accessing O&M services in maybe some of the Indigenous communities in which you work?
Yeah, I think one of the barriers we have is because we are called guide dogs, and as an organization, it's called Guide Dogs. A lot of people in those communities think, well, we don't need a dog. We need particular training. So I think the thing is not to go into the community on a cold sell, if you know what I mean. It's important to work with people who have already made inroads through health and support and are there on a more regular basis. They're very used to organizations coming into and providing a service, and then due to funding or lack of access and that sort of thing, they may not see those organizations again. So they have a bit of a recall of a history of not having a consistent service. And so you've really got to be providing a service and coming back again. And I think one of the ladies said on your video that it's a very slow process, because they're used to a lot of organizations letting them down and not providing consistent services. Because that's just the nature of rural services, unfortunately. But I feel we're getting there slowly. There's an awful lot of people we don't see, and the only people we do get to see are the ones who put their hands up and say, "Yeah, I'll give this a go." And I think once we get to see a few people in these smaller areas, word gets around pretty quick. And it's not one of those things you do with white Australians where you put an advert on the radio, hey, say, have you got a low vision? We'll come and see you. Come to our local clinic. And it doesn't. You've got to really do the yard. You've got to go in there as someone who's listening to what they ask for, be very supportive, come back again, work with their local people, because if you just come in and work with them on their own and the local people don't know about you, then they won't have that understanding of the services you provide. And it's being flexible as well. And it's so rewarding when you do finally get someone who actually picks up on the skills and goes, yeah, I can use this. So there are barriers, but most of the barriers we have are probably ones we provide ourselves because we're working with that organizational constraints of how we do things. Yeah.
Sure. So one of the things I did hear you say is listening and learning first before we start to kind of go in there. What are some ways that you have listened and learned in order to make some inroads in some of those communities or to kind of break down some of those barriers?
I think a big thing is being able to hand over your skills, not own the skills of being an O&M, saying I will teach you one-to-one. If anything is better than not providing any services at all. So if an uncle or an auntie wants to teach somebody in their community how Jeremy taught somebody else, that's a really good start because they've started to understand the fact that our training can really help. And so I think it's a case of not owning and not being too protective about how precise things are doing, because a lot of these people are not crossing busy roads. They're not doing the Donna Salvo crossing 5 lanes, and they're on a island where they're trying to get around safely. There's a lot of trip hazards, and so we have to really modify the techniques. And the look they get when they walk through a community and people go, hey, what's he doing over there? And then you've got to stop and explain. And then if they're impressed enough, they'll then pass it on too. So yeah, I think the modifying your techniques, not being too clinical on your approach, and working with the local medical people and clinics to find out where they've tripped up in the past, where they've made mistakes. So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Cassie, can you please play A1 starting at, actually you can play the whole video. Before you do, this is Autumn Booths. She lives in Juneau, and she's an orientation and mobility specialist up in Juneau.
Were there any barriers to accessing O&M services in your community? If so, can you please share some examples? How would you improve O&M services to people within your culture? Here in southeastern Alaska, we have both the Tlingit and Haida cultures, and being a remote area, we have not had an O&M specialist for the students in person and full time in well over a decade. And with me coming in now, the students and the families have said to me they feel supported and they feel as though they can always ask questions because I am here all the time. And to help improve O&M services to people within the Tlingit and Haida cultures, I would like to continue learning how I can offer my services to adults who are older, who may be in need of O&M services now that I am in person full-time here in Juneau.
So I'm hearing a running theme through all of these folks, and I'm guessing you're all hearing it too, is that access is is a really big barrier. And if it's, especially in some of these more remote locations, I mean, we all, at least in the US, I know we're always talking about the O&M shortage. I imagine that's going to be in all countries, that we just don't have the number of professionals to meet the needs of all of the people. And especially as, you know, we've got baby boomers and our age-related vision loss, that population is going to continue to grow. And so depending on what your state or your province or your area looks like in terms of adult services, I mean, having a shortage and the supply is low, the demand is growing, you know, access just becomes a real issue. And I'm not here to say that, but I guess that's the tie that binds, right? Is that all of us, all of the clients, the comms are having issues with access. Can you play Angel's video from 501? Oh, I'm sorry. Before you start playing that, another just to add on to what Autumn said about it's not just access, it's also consistency. So for her to be there and be there full time, and that consistency and that relationship building and that trust building, as many of you said, which is a really big part of that culturally responsive teaching, those are things that she's been able to foster by working with that community for a consistent length of time. And I'm going to try to paraphrase or take out the key highlights from what Angel says. So try to listen as carefully as you can, but I'll also try to capture or restate some of the things that she says.
Services in a student's community. Absolutely. The first barrier is the environment. It's a very harsh environment in the winter, which is primarily when I work with my students. It's difficult at best. Like I said, many villages don't have roads, they have boardwalks. In the winter, when they're covered with snow, the snow is usually higher than the boardwalk and higher than the area, of course, that's under the boardwalk. And so it's very difficult to, figure out where the edge is and safely move and navigate through feet of snow, sometimes 3, 4, 5 feet of snow. In negative degree temperatures. So the environment, it can be very harsh and very difficult, a huge barrier to accessing O&M services.
Okay, so one of the first barriers that Angel talks about here is the environment. Living in Alaska, and especially because Angel she's based in Anchorage, Alaska, but they focus on working with, and she'll describe this in her video when we talk about the next question, but she works out in the bush, in the remote areas, the rural areas of Alaska, which, I mean, Alaska is bigger than Texas. So if that gives you any idea of just the sheer size of Alaska. And so they only have a handful or they'll have few O&M specialists there. For those of you in Alaska, if you want to give a quick shout out in the chat, by all means. They have very harsh winters. Where they get a ton of snow. A lot of where she works is in villages that have boardwalks, but they don't have paved roads, and that's covered with snow. And sometimes the snow is so high that it's actually very difficult to feel where the edges of those boardwalks are. Also with negative temperatures, I mean, if it's really cold here in Illinois, I'm not taking learners out, but sometimes you just have to figure out how to adapt with that. And so communicating with the learner and with the family and community could be a solution for that. But just knowing that the environment as being a major barrier for instruction, at least in Angel's specific context. If you want to continue to play that video.
And the second barrier that I find are the belief systems of Native Alaskans. A lot of villages and the people there believe that if a student has no vision, that they will be taken care of their entire lives. It's never thought that student should live independently or be able to navigate his environment independently. They just always know that they're going to be there. And so the belief system can be a huge barrier. Belief systems against canes. So those two things are probably the largest barriers that I face here in Alaska, working with students that have low vision or blindness and have O&M needs.
So one of the first questions we asked the panel was, what does independence mean to you? And we asked that question because, as we know, as I noted earlier, independence means something very different to each person. And I know that Angel mentioned it as one of the barriers. That's not necessarily wrong or incorrect. When we're talking about culturally responsive teaching practices, we want to meet people where they are. And so we're taught in our O&M programs a lot of the time that we're trying to do independent travel. We're trying to, push for independent travel and independence. And that's the ultimate goal. And what we're learning through this presentation and through hearing these different perspectives is that what we're learning how to do is be responsive to the cultures, not just our own. And so like I said, what Angel said about it being a barrier, that it's that independent, or perspectives or belief systems about independence and about cane use can be perceived as a barrier. They're also a learning opportunity for us as orientation and mobility specialists to listen and learn and dive deeper into that. Our next question that we had for the panel is, what cultural modifications have you made to create more successful learning environment, or a more successful learning environment for your clients? So this is going to focus in a bit more on our O&M specialists. So Jeremy, if you'd like to start.
So I think first of all, fitting in with the community. The particular island I go to, Palm Island and places, there are the local community centres which have their own uniforms or polo shirts which have indigenous colours on them and things like that. So you're not walking in with big clinical looking shirts. I think that's important. As I mentioned before, the indigenous coloured canes, and I saw a couple of people say, is that against the law? No, you can actually have canes which are not white. As I'd say, it suits these particular cultures better to have their own colours. Gives people a conversation piece. I think you've got to be very careful not to have too many colours that are too dark, because other people won't see them, especially if you're crossing roads and that sort of thing. It's also not just going in as the front person, but going in with somebody they know. I think that's what I've learned. There might be someone they know who does something completely different. It might be somebody who works in optometry or something, and he'll come along and you'll say, I brought Jeremy along today, and he'd like to say hello to you. So not going in there and just trying to do it all on your own. Fitting in with the community, sitting down under a tree, talking to people. Don't bring them into an office to do the assessment. So you bring your clipboard and hope paper doesn't blow all over the place, and sit on the edge of a fence and chat to people. Just remembering you're a guest in their particular community. I'm no expert, but if we have the same discussion, hopefully in 10 years' time, there'll be more progress. I think you're on mute now, Molly.
Oh yeah, thank you for sharing that. Someone also mentioned being careful about what specific words they use or how they phrase things, and just, being aware of the language that you're using. Cassie, can you please play A2 starting at, play A2.
My client is a 9-year-old in our TCLL program here in Juneau, Alaska. TCLL stands for Tlingit Culture, Language, and Literacy. And this program is part of our district, but it is separate. And being the orientation and mobility specialist who comes into that program, although it is housed in a district building, I do recognize that it is a separate program. And keeping that in mind, I got to know my students and their my student and their classmates and the teacher and the other teachers in that program before really stepping in and trying to help those teachers implement O&M skills even more in detail. And I have tried my best to learn a little bit more about their culture and about how they view persons with disabilities. And when I asked someone that question, one of the teachers, they said, we just view it as someone who needs a little bit more help. So we will step in and we help them, or we ask them if they need help and then we help them. And so to better my knowledge of our Tlingit and Haida clans here in southeastern Alaska, I applied for the cultural orientation course that is being offered this year. This is a brand new course. And although it is not visual impairment specific, it is clan specific, so that I can better my knowledge base and continue to support my student both in the classroom as well as outside the classroom and in their community.
So hopefully all of you were able to hear what Autumn shared. In her community, they actually have a cultural orientation course that helps. It's brand new, and it's something that she has available to her. And I recognize that this isn't available to everybody, but it offers her the opportunity to learn in-depth knowledge about the Tlingit and the Haida communities that are with whom she works. And so that's kind of a I think at least a rare opportunity. Does anyone else go ahead and put it in the chat if anyone else has experience with or has the opportunity to do that kind of cultural orientation. And then while people are putting that in the chat, Cassie, if you could play Angel's video from the start until 3:10.
Hi, my name is Angel Black, and I am the teacher for visually impaired and the orientation and mobility specialist at the Special Education Service Agency in Anchorage, Alaska. We serve students in rural Alaska. We go to all the places that are not on the road system in Alaska. So we get to go to Bush, Alaska, we get to go to the villages and serve all of the Native children in those areas. I'm going to answer just a few questions. The first question is, what cultural modifications have I made to create a successful learning environment for my students? Every time I go out, there are cultural modifications that need to be made. The Alaskan Native culture, economy, and traditional way of life are intimately tied to living off the land, gathering, hunting, and fishing for food. It's a subsistence lifestyle. So many of my students' families are worried that their children will not be able to help provide the food for families as they grow. So as an O&M specialist, one of the first things we do is figure out a way to make that happen for my students. One recent way was I had a student that was going on a muskox hunt. And so we had to figure out a way for him to go safely on this muskox hunt, to be able to find the muskox, and to be able to shoot the muskox with a bow and arrow. So we've worked a long time to make that happen, but ultimately he has had several successes, and he's thrilled with the results, as is his family. Another student I have, his parents did not want him to use a cane at all in the village. He was allowed to use it in school while he was walking around at school, but not in the village. This is a village that is built on a river, so the soil is very marshy. There are no roads at all in the village. There are only boardwalks. So it was very, very important that he learned to use a cane so he could safely navigate the village alone and independently. So at first we decorated his cane in using cultural artifacts that were important to him, and his parents still didn't like it. So eventually I had a cane made for him that has a seal skin cover. This is real seal skin. This was made and created by a Native woman in Northwest Alaska. We still have the red tip at the end, and it was made in such a way that the cane can still be taken apart and folded. The second question was,
okay, so just to kind of recap what Angel shared, so it's her CISA, it's Special Education Service Agencies, and she worked, like I mentioned before, she works in rural Alaska in the villages. And so one of the ways that one of the cultural modifications she did was that she worked with the community in order to figure out a way so that her learner could be a part of muskox hunting, because one of the concerns of the family was that this student would not be able to contribute with the hunting, the fishing, gathering, because they live off the land. That's what they do in that community. And so through communicating with them, she was able to work with the family and go out with them on a muskox hunt, and figured out and worked with him on how to find and shoot a bow and arrow. And then also, as you saw, the sealskin covered cane, which eventually became accepted by the family to be used in the community. Yeah, that it is a really cool sealskin cover. Okay. So now we're kind of we're getting close to the end here. We're at 4:32. Oseas or Jeremy, if there's anything you'd like to add or you know what, let's open it up to question and answer, because I have a feeling there's a lot of questions. that people would like answered. And unfortunately, just so you all know, if there are Alaska-centered questions, we will not be able to answer them. So if it has to do with Australia, or it has to do with some of the things that Oseas has talked about, we can answer, or we can hopefully answer those questions. Otherwise, we'll have to just collect the ones related to Alaska and share those with our folks via email. Go ahead, Leandra, hit us with them.
Okay, so our first question, Jennifer asked, and this is directed to Oseas. Oseas, at what point in your life or what age did you feel comfortable to confidently advocate for yourself for your O&M needs?
I believe at a very young age, perhaps. See, I received training from 6 to 13, and when I moved to, I think when I moved to the US when I was 20, and I started going to college. I started college a little later here in the US. So I would say around early 20s. I was noticing that they were going over my basic skills and then showing me tactile maps, and I felt like it was just a waste of time. So I started saying what I really needed from my lessons.
Thank you. We had a couple questions asked about the colored canes and everything, but Jeremy, I think you kind of addressed that, and then there were a couple comments in the chat that addressed it. But the questions were, are there not laws against colored canes or anything like that? Of course, there are in the U.S. We have a white cane law, but is there anything you feel like you need to address on that, Jeremy or Oseas?
I think we have enough trouble in Australia educating the public of what white canes mean, and I think it is difficult sometimes to say, and also some people use different color canes. We have a lot of hikers around Australia who have the telescopic canes that they use for hiking around, and people mistake those for different types of canes and that sort of thing. But no, in Australia, if you're using a long cane, and it's also the method in which you're using it, we would hope that people understand that. But also in these particular communities where I'm working, they're tending to get around pretty rural areas too. And I do know one guy who uses a stick which he's carved himself, and he's wrapped some felt around the handle. And the thing is, if he's getting around and it's picking up obstacles, and he's not looking at the ground anymore, he's now lifting his head up to actually see where he's walking, you've got something happening there. It's the actual technique and having the connection between using the cane to check for objects ahead of you and using your remaining vision to look ahead. The goal has been completed. So we shouldn't get too tied up with the type of equipment we're using, but more to do with the technique and the way we're training the person and the brain to make the most of their vision. So, yeah.
And I do want to address in the chat that Miss Donna Sauerberger commented that research shows that white canes are more effective, but okay.
For drivers, just to be visible to drivers.
To see,
yes. But if you're just trying to avoid obstacles.
Okay,
and we also in Australia, we also teach children. We have kiddie color canes too. So if that's another motivator, and other kids are seeing little Sarah getting around with her kiddie color cane, she's happy with it. We have a couple of adults who have different color canes to match the particular outfits they're wearing. So it's pretty different, yes, but it enables you to have a technique and a tool which avoids obstacles, gets you around, and it's really up to the public to pick up on the fact that you're using a long cane.
Perfect. Oseas, did you want to address that at all, or?
Well, I used different color canes. I used to have a royal blue cane, and I think it was really cool. But like you were saying, just when it comes to finding obstacles, I think they are all good. I think people around me who were O&Ms or TBIs were very critical to that fact that I was using that cane. But unfortunately, when I had a couple of incidents in the street, they happened to be with a white cane where drivers would probably turn the wrong way or took the light, and they here in Miami, the white cane law was not enforced on those two occasions. So to me, feeling comfortable with the cane and is what's most important. Having the correct length of my cane, that's very important for me, probably more than the color.
I think that's the kind of the consensus I'm seeing scrolling through the chat is just whatever cane a client will use is what we want, because we want them to be successful. So color's not really an issue. I'm gonna move on. Danica said, "Does anyone have any strategies for when a family isn't supportive?"
Yeah, I think it's important to respect that, but to say, hey, is it okay? We have a certain number of lessons where the family can come out and have a go themselves, have a little bit of a go with a cane, perhaps with a blindfold on, or just close your eyes, just to get the idea of what we're trying to do, so that they're actually instrumental in that support. Because if, as you say, if you don't get them on the side or supporting, then it's a great barrier in itself. So it's very, very important to include them in that, so everybody understands what it is you're trying to do. And you're not necessarily enabling that person to be independent so the rest of the family can't be supportive. You're just making them more safer, more independent, using their vision better so they can enjoy more time and flexibility with the family.
Okay, so a question from Mary, and this was based, this was a question for the Alaskans, but I would also like to know, in Australia, is diabetic neuropathy a significant issue for the visually impaired in Australia?
So I'm going to do an all call to our Alaskan friends. Go ahead and pop that in the chat. If you haven't already, if you wouldn't mind sharing it.
With the indigenous population in Australia, it's very largely diabetic retinopathy, glaucoma, probably because a lot of these communities are not quite getting the healthcare on a regular basis, and not getting the education. It's improving. Definitely, trachoma is another one, but yeah, it's mainly glaucoma and things like that, where unfortunately, if it's not checked properly, they have quite a quick download at the effect of it. But through communities like the ones I go to, there's a very good support network now developing where, and also making sure that when the ophthalmologists who come in not very often, there's now terrific support networks to make sure that person does get to that appointment. So there's the transport to take care of, in reinforcing the fact it's important to get to see this ophthalmologist now, because he won't be coming, or she won't be coming in for a long time. And so there's a lot more support networks working now where they can actually make sure that person goes. And what's more, there might be a group of them going to the ophthalmologist, so they get to go together. They're not all going on their own. So I think that's half the secret, is not putting it all on the client, but having the support, the networks, the communication, making sure that people have plenty of time to get organized, and making sure the family is included.
Okay, I'm trying to scroll through the questions and see. So Andrew has a question that said, "I'm curious if it's standard for you to teach your clients to keep cane in the center of body while walking, or if other hand positions are encouraged." And he says he asked because while he was in training, was told in the center, but with rigid cane tend to get jabbed in the stomach because of cracks in sidewalks and pavement. So he modified his training. So what standard do you teach, in center of the body or to the side?
I think that's geared, since you work a lot in rural communities, Jeremy,
Yeah.
since you're working it with places that don't have a lot of roads, or maybe broken up roads and things. What's your experience with when you teach using the cane? Do you have it centered in the middle? Do you use it off to the side, so they don't get stabbed in the stomach every 2 steps?
So I'm a real fan of the Bundu Basha, and I have modified a few canes sometimes where I'll actually take a little bit off the end of the handle on the top of the cane and put a Bundu Basha on the top of the handle, so that they'll be on a good footpath. They'll be using their rolling tip cane, and then when it gets really rough, they actually flick the cane around and use the other end of it. So that could be another lecture one day on how to modify different things, because you don't want to be carrying two canes around. And also with the bundu basher, it's good to have a rigid cane, because otherwise the folding cane tends to twist and doesn't stay in scope. But yeah, I think a longer cane, keeping the cane at the side and that sort of thing, because they're following some pretty rough terrain. And sometimes the beautiful thing about the bundu basher one too is you can actually follow chicken wire and things like that with it too. So you can follow shorelines quite nicely without it getting too stuck. And it's just very good for snaking through very, very tight little tracks and things. The other thing about canes is the Dakota disc. I think that's a terrific thing. Not just good for sand and things, but for walking along beaches. Walking along beaches, it becomes a bit of a main road on some of these islands, because it's a quicker way of getting from A to B, because you're going around the edge and you haven't got the obstacles. And the trick with the Dakota disc is to, wherever the water is coming halfway up the beach, you're following the difference between the dry sand and the wet sand, which is usually a pretty straight line. And through doing that, you'll get the resistance when you run the cane across the wet sand as opposed to the dry sand. So you can follow that beach all the way around, pretty well up the middle, as long as you get the tide at the right height.
Thank you, Jeremy.
So I know we're right at the end of our time here. So sorry to cut you off, Leandra. There is one last thing I wanted to share with everybody. I don't get a kickback for this book. I just want to share it as a resource to show you. I know I mentioned the Tellefson book, and this is actually where I got some of the, so it provides information about standards. And it is peer reviewed, it's research based. It was designed for school age children ages 24 months through 21 years. But basically what this does is it provides you with some guideposts to ensure that you're providing equitable instruction. So, you can adjust what you need to based on the learner, if they've got additional disabilities or anything like that. But this is just a resource that I thought I would share with you. And then the link, if you wanted to get it or whatever, is in the resource document that I shared. But when I say equitable instruction, it's making sure that we're not teaching things because we're lowering our expectations. We're trying to, again, rise the tide, or help the tide rise to meet our expectations. So what can we do? How can we scaffold our learner to meet these standards? And what has been agreed upon as a field, at least in the US, has been agreed upon in the field or as things that they should learn to be travelers, successful travelers, I'll say. Okay. And that was it. The last little plug, I guess. Hello? Oh, there's Steve. There's Uncle Steve.
I've been here all the time.
Oh.
I've heard everything, but apparently I wasn't on screen.
Can you do us a favor real quick and introduce yourself?
Yeah, Steve Widder. I'm from Armidale, New South Wales, in Australia. I'm an Indigenous Australian. I've been a user of guide dogs, canes, for 30 years. And Jeremy was talking about the red, black, and yellow cane.
Yay!
This is my one here. I was showing it, but I didn't realise I wasn't on the screen. And I've been a client for 30 years, and I do have some issues about support, because and I can relate to the people in Alaska as well. We're very isolated. We're very big, and we don't have a lot of people around. I live in a large provincial city in New South Wales, and we don't have any base for guide dogs there or Vision Australia, and we have to have irregular visits from people. I haven't had a occupation. I haven't had a mobility and orientation lesson for over 12 months, probably because we haven't got the staff to do it. And I've been using it for over 30 years now, so I'm pretty used to it anyway. But if I require it, I'd probably have to wait for a while for them to come. I certainly don't have the issues that some people in Alaska have, you know, about the boardwalks and or the boardwalks and all that sort of stuff with the snow up high. Very fortunate I am, and I really appreciate the services that guide dogs do offer and can offer. It has allowed me to have that independence and mobility, and it allows me to have a good quality of life and to be able to participate in the workforce, and to have a social life as well. You know, I've got a lot of support within family and within the community. I've always been grateful for the work with guide dogs, both guide dogs and Vision Australia in Australia. And it's good to learn what's going on in other countries as well, particularly up in Alaska. Good day to Steve Bailey up there in Fairbanks. I'm alumni from UAF up in Fairbanks. I used to go there, and I had my white cane when I first started using it. Many times I lost it in the snow in the middle of winter, so I can relate to that. Anyway, that's all I've got to say, and I did listen to everything that was said, and thank you very much for the opportunity. I don't know what's happened there about screen wasn't on or anything.
We'll have to have you back another day, Steve, but hopefully you agreed with things. I was trying to wing it there for you for a while.
No, listen, Jeremy, I heard everything you said, and I agree. I agree with all the stuff that was said.
Thank you.
I don't know why I wasn't on screen or why I couldn't unmute.
Hey,
Steve, I've got a support worker who just come in who did it for me. Who did it for me just towards the end. So,
well, we got you in the end, and you made a grand entrance, so that's fantastic. And I suppose one more quick question is how do we promote the services better? Sometimes people are a bit reluctant to take up the services. Is it something where someone like you who's got a support?
I think Indigenous organisations are pretty good to do that. You know, there are statewide organisations, there are national ones in Australia, like in Alaska. You have Aboriginal health services, Aboriginal medical services, Aboriginal community groups. I think we should them to do it in our communities. You've got people there where people live. For example, there's half a dozen good organisations here in my town, which is a small town of about 30,000 people, about the same as Fairbanks. Steve, our town, Steve Bailey up in Fairbanks. Use the organisations, use the existing organisations that are there, and some of the community active community people that are here as well, and promote it through, the land councils that are statewide. Promote your services through our services through there.
That's definitely the way to do it, rather than going in there on your own and wondering why people aren't coming to you. So thank you very much.
You've got people that are there, and as you said in the start there, Jeremy, guide dogs. The name guide dogs puts people off. A lot of people don't want a dog. They don't want a dog, but if they know that they can offer cane and mobility training and orientation, they might be more acceptable to it. And I in my own community, I speak to people with vision impairment, and I show them the use of a cane and how to use it and what to do. Encourage them to take up the service from both Vision Australia and Guide Dogs. And another way of doing this is go through the local disability networks as well, and NDIS providers.
Just a quick closure. What year did you do the Dakota Trail as a fundraiser, and how long did that take you?
I did that with another blind person, both cane users, in 2012. The Dakota Trail's in New Guinea, Papua New Guinea, which is north of Australia, and another blind person traversed 96 kilometres. We wanted to do it as blind people. We were the first two blind men to cover it, to honour soldiers that supported Australia in the Second World War. But our project that we had was called Blind Courage.
Terrific.
Hey, Steve, it's Molly. Just two things left, if that's okay, that I can ask you. So there is a question, and then also, I don't know if you're planning on sticking around, but at we have another presentation at 5 to 6. And then after that, there's a networking party. And our chat is blowing up with people saying, hey, Uncle Steve, we're so glad you're here. I got a million, like, there are a lot of people who want to just learn about your experience and talk to you. So if you're interested in sticking around at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock Eastern time, if you're available for that, that would be awesome. And then there is a question that asks, how long did it take for you to achieve your goals, given that your trainer wasn't there very often for mobility?
Yeah. Okay. I'll come back for that. What time is it, Jeremy, in Australia? The 5 to 6 on the East Coast. What time is it here?
So if you stick around for another hour, if you stay in the room, then just after this next presentation is done, you should be, but I don't know you. I mean, I'm sure you have a life, which is also okay.
Listen, I do have a life, and I am working at the moment, but I'll keep this on and I'll listen to it.
Okay. 11 a.m. in New South Wales. Okay. So is that what time it is currently, Joanson?
It's 10 a.m. now.
10 a.m. Okay, so 11 a.m. would be when we would start the networking party, or
So
11 a.m., 11:15.
Will it be on the same link?
Yep. You could just stay in the room.
Okay, I'll do that.
All right, excellent. Well, we look forward to seeing when it ends. Yeah, will be 11 a.m. Okay, yep. Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us, Steve. I know this was, we so appreciate you persisting, and for you folks sticking around, asking great questions, and for us to get to learn from you.